Takulandirani ku AMTV Malawi kuchimake kwa nkhani zenizeni. Ngati nkhani imeneyo kuno kulibe, dziwani kuti nkhani imeneyo ndi yabodza.
Mzuzu Airport Control Police, who escalated the same to their superiors at the regional police, was sent around to all police stations in the surrounding areas at Karonga, Likoma, Kasungu, Rumpi, Chinteche, and Usisia. After all these attempts, Mzuzu Air Traffic Control Tower then called Kia to ask Kia to raise other aircrafts flying in the Malawian airspace if they could try to listen to both frequencies, both in Mzuzu and Lilongwe, and relay information to MFT-03. It is in evidence that at the time, there were flights from Blantyre to Lilongwe, 7QCMK at 10:50 hours, and another flight from Likoma to Lilongwe, 7QFTA, 11:16 hours. Both flights tried to raise MFT-03 on both 118.1 MHz and 128.0 MHz, but got no response. Another overflight flying from Addis Ababa to Harare, ET-873, was also contacted at 11:20 hours. It also tried to raise MFT-03 on these two frequencies, but received no response. It is in evidence that aircraft switch between these frequencies when they are within their respective controlled airspaces of Lilongwe and Mzuzu. It was in evidence that by this time, Kia Control Tower had received many calls from the MDF, Kia Aviation Security, and Kia VIP Lounge inquiring about the aircraft MFT-03. From the MDF, the message was clear that once any contact is established with the MFT-03, the crew should be advised to return to Kia as the funeral ceremony in Katabe had already started. On the other hand, the VIP Lounge wanted to know the return arrival time once contact was established so that they could contact and organize with the late Vice President's office. The Commission received evidence that the MFT-03 used a very high frequency or VHF radio, which uses line of sight. By this, it means the contact will be established between the aircraft and another point as long as there is no obstruction to the line of contact. Evidence received also established that it was normal for crew flying to Mzuzu to sometimes fly to Ekwendeni if the weather is bad, and thereafter visually using the M1 road to navigate their way and land at Mzuzu Airport, since the airport is just next to the M1 road. It was also in evidence that Mzuzu weather is very unpredictable, such that it is common for pilots to circle around for a while before finding a space to land. It was in evidence that in aviation, the air control tower would normally issue weather reports to the approaching aircraft, but it is the decision on whether to land or not rests with the pilot in command. At 11:30 hours, after noting that there was still radio silence, Mr. Moyo reported to Kia airport manager and director of aerodromes and air navigation standards in the Civil Aviation Authority that MFT-03 was missing. The Commission established that information that the aircraft was 20 nautical miles north of Mzuzu and that the crew were flying to Ekwendeni led to some confusion. The confusion was further exacerbated in retrospect when it was estimated later that the aircraft crashed at 10:16, which was 4 minutes after the contact with Mzuzu Airport. The location of the crash is nearly equidistant to the 20 nautical miles position stated by Mr. Moyo. The Commission received contrary evidence from the military at the Zomba Air Base, who were informed that the aircraft was 20 nautical miles northeast of Mzuzu, which was around Usisia in Katabe. The Commission heard evidence that when weather is bad in Mzuzu and its surrounding areas, pilots sometimes go to Usisia hoping to approach Mzuzu from the lakeside, or Ekwendeni hoping to use the M1 road in order to navigate and land at the Mzuzu airfield. From the evidence received, it was also thought that the aircraft had failed to land and was therefore contemplating returning to Lilongwe. The mention of Ekwendeni also had the effect of directing the initial search to Ekwendeni before it shifted to the Airtel tower at Layplan. In light of the delayed arrival of the late Vice President at Mzuzu Airport, the Deputy Commissioner of Police for the Northern Region, Mr. Clinton Mitai, told the Commission that on instructions from the Commissioner of Police for the Northern Region, Mr. Richard Lohanga, he ordered the Vice President's Guard Commander, who had led the advance team and were at Mzuzu Airport, to remove all the motor vehicles that formed the late Vice President's convoy to avoid raising suspicion with a delay among the people. The convoy was moved to the regional police station. The conduct at the funeral service of the late Mr. Kasambala. According to the evidence before the Commission, the funeral ceremony in Karabe started around 1000 hours. When the funeral service started, and those present were advised that the late Vice President had been delayed. Later on, it was announced that the late Vice President had failed to attend the funeral. Evidence received indicates that around 12:30 hours, the Commissioner of Police for the Northern Region and other senior police and MDF4 officers were seen leaving the funeral service in a hurried state. The Rescue Coordination Center. Mr. Fred Chisepeya, Director of Aerodromes and Air Navigation Standards in the Civil Aviation Authority, informed the Commission that a Rescue Coordination Center is a point where a search and rescue function is instituted and coordinated whenever an aircraft goes missing. Each country has an obligation under the International Civil Aviation Organization's Convention on International Civil Aviation, also called the Chicago Convention, to institute a search and rescue mission when an aircraft goes missing. In Malawi, in the Malawian aviation industry, the Rescue Coordination Center is established at Kia. Annex 12 to the Chicago Convention refers to three emergency phases which guide search and rescue. A. Uncertainty phase. A situation where uncertainty exists as to the safety of an aircraft and its occupants. B. Alert phase. A situation where apprehension exists as to the safety of an aircraft and its occupants. C. Distress phase. A situation where there is reasonable uncertainty that an aircraft and its occupants are threatened by grave and imminent danger and require immediate assistance. Accordingly, the Rescue Coordination Center was activated at 11:31 hours after the senior aerodrome's flight officer in Mzuzu reported to the airport manager at Kia and the director of aerodromes and air navigation at the Civil Aviation Authority that he had a missing aircraft. The Rescue Coordination Center was initially established in the Air Traffic Control Room to coordinate the search of the missing aircraft. At 1200 hours, the Rescue Coordination Center was moved to the conference room at the Airports Development Limited ADL for two reasons. First was to accommodate more stakeholders that were coming to join in the operation, and secondly, to allow the Air Traffic Control Room to revert to its functions and deal with air traffic within the airport vicinity. At that point, the following gathered in the Rescue Coordination Center: the Chief Executive of Airports Development Limited, the Acting Director General of the Civil Aviation Authority, the Officer in charge of Police at Kia, and other officials from the Malawi Civil Aviation Authority, Department of Civil Aviation, Malawi Defense Force, Malawi Air Force, Airports Development Limited, Airport Police, National Intelligence Service, Airport Fire Services. The Rescue Coordination Center facilitated further contacts to the following airstrips to check if the aircraft had landed in those airstrips. Likoma, Vwaza, Kabwafu, Karonga, Nyika, Chitipa, Dwangwa, Chinteche, Mfuwe in Zambia, and Mbeya and Songwe in Tanzania. At 12:42, Civil Aviation authorities based at Mzuzu Airport deployed teams to search around Ekwendeni area where the crew had reported that they were proceeding at initial contact with Mzuzu Air Traffic Control Tower. The commanding officer from Moyale Barracks also mobilized a team of servicemen to go and search around Ekwendeni. Meanwhile, the Rescue Coordination Center also contacted the Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Center based in Johannesburg, Republic of South Africa for assistance. Activation of search and rescue. After 17 hours, which was exactly 4 hours from the time the MAFT-03 had departed from Kia, with fuel endurance of 4 hours, the search and rescue operation was activated. At this point, it was absolutely clear that MAFT-03 was no longer in the air. The search and rescue was coordinated between the MDF, the police, and civil aviation, and was established at an old airstrip near Laiplai at Chikangawa in Mzimba. The activation of the search and rescue entailed mobilizing police officers, mobilizing military personnel, mobilizing Red Cross Society personnel, mobilizing civil aviation personnel, and alerting Mzuzu Central Hospital and Mzimba District Hospital, which are closest to Laiplai but less equipped. The two hospitals were also to set up trauma centers within their hospitals, mobilizing ambulances from the two hospitals as well as other health institutions, and establishing a command center at Laiplai. The first group to be mobilized was from the MDF, Moyale Barracks. Two sections of troops and an ambulance proceeded to go and start searching in Ekwendeni based on communication from Mzuzu Air Traffic Control, because they were thinking that it was the last position the aircraft went. As the troops were being dispatched, another communication came that the Ekwendeni mission should be cancelled, and instead the same search team should proceed to Laiplai, because the information by telecom providers and an Allied Communications Regulatory Authority was that a mobile phone signal of one of the passengers was picked by one of the towers at Laiplai. The team proceeded to Chikangawa, where the search concentrated around the Airtel Tower at Laiplai, based on the indicative radius of 10 kilometers around the tower at Laiplai. Mobile phone data showed that some phones belonging to the passengers connected with the Laiplai Airtel Tower, with one phone still active at 11:06 hours. Data from Airtel also had one of the phones briefly connecting with the Airtel Tower in Chikangawa at 10:12 hours. The Chikangawa Tower is closer to Mzuzu than the Laiplai Airtel Tower. After the search of the 10 kilometers radius achieved with no success, the search was extended to a 20-kilometer radius. Evidence received from all the institutions and agencies who were engaged in the search was that the weather was very bad on that day. It was foggy, cold, with rain drizzles, and visibility was very poor. It was received in evidence that while the search and rescue had started a bit earlier, it was around 1700 hours that most of the stakeholders converged at Laiplai, and they kept coming. Organization of the search and rescue. Evidence received shows that initially there was poor coordination of the search and rescue. From the trigger point of 17 hours, different stakeholders and institutions organized their own search and rescue missions. The MDF mobilized its platoon based at Kasitu camp in the Laiplai part of Chikangawa Forest as the initial team, which was later joined by personnel from Moyale Barracks. The platoon at Laiplai has a permanent base as part of the protection of the Chikangawa Forest or the Laiplai plantation. The police mobilized its personnel from Kadabe, Mzuzu, Mberwa Division, and Mzimba. The Red Cross mobilized volunteers from Mzuzu and Mzimba, but were joined with officers from the headquarters in Lilongwe. The team from Lilongwe organized blankets and a drone. Laiplai provided its staff, especially those who normally work in the forest, as well as vehicles. UTM had some of its members participating in the search. Members of the public and the media joined the search as and when they could. Notification of His Excellency the President. At 11:35, the MDF commander contacted and informed the President of the missing MFT-03, as well as the fact that they were searching for the aircraft. At 12:15 hours, the commander of the MDF went to Kamuzu Palace to brief His Excellency the President in person. The MDF commander was ordered by His Excellency the President to continue the efforts to locate the MFT-03 and report back within 4 hours. The Commission received evidence that later in the day, the MDF commander, accompanied by the Air Force commander, went again to Kamuzu Palace at 1500 hours. They were joined by the Secretary to the President Cabinet, Minister of Health, and the Inspector General of Police. The aim of this visit was to apprise His Excellency the President on the situation on hand and the progress made so far. The President was informed that the plane was still missing and could not be located. The President directed that the Inspector General of Police and the Minister of Health should go and brief Madame Mere Chilima about the missing aircraft. His Excellency the President advised that a press release be prepared informing the nation of the development. His Excellency the President further directed that his trip to Bahamas be cancelled and that external support be sought for search and rescue. After that, His Excellency the President called for a cabinet meeting at 1800 hours. This was later shifted to 2200 hours to allow several cabinet ministers who were traveling from outside Lilongwe to attend. The agenda of the cabinet meeting was the missing of the MFT-03. After the cabinet meeting, His Excellency the President addressed the nation at 2300 hours, where he informed the nation of the missing MFT-03 and provided an update of what was known to Cabinet at that point and the progress the search was making. Communication from passengers. The Secretary to the Vice President, Dr. Sikwese, gave evidence that he communicated via WhatsApp text with the late Vice President while the MFT-03 was in flight between 09:30 and 10:07 hours. He stated that his last message sent at 11:10 hours was however never delivered. The last message was requesting the late Vice President to consider returning to Lilongwe as there were indications that there was severe weather in Mzuzu. The Special Assistant to the Vice President Media, Ms. Winnie Nyondo, gave evidence that she received a text message via telegram at 10:10 hours from the old Dukam to the Vice President, Inspector Kisomo Chimanin. The message read, and I quote, "Too much turbulence." She later posted this message on her Facebook account. She indicated that this was not the first time that the ADC and other members traveling with the late Vice President in that aircraft had communicated while in flight. Evidence indicates that there were several phones which were active during the flight to Mzuzu. These phones belonged to the late Assistant Commissioner of Police, Kapeni, the late Inspector Chisomo Chimanin, the late Major Wells Aidin, and evidence obtained from Telecom Networks Malawi shows that one of the phones belonging to Daniel Kanyemba had gone off at 10:16 hours on 10th June 2024. The last tower that it was used was the TNM Tower at Pampala Hill in Tungwa, the site of the accident. This information was given long after the aircraft was already discovered. The medical preparations. Evidence was received that around 1500 hours, the Mzimba District Hospital and Mzuzu Central Hospital were alerted of a possible aircraft accident in Chikangawa. The two hospitals were asked to prepare emergency ambulances and emergency centers. Mzuzu Central Hospital mobilized an emergency team comprising a trauma surgeon, an anesthetist, nurses, including a trauma nurse and critical care nurse, and 3 ambulances. Unlike Mzuzu Central Hospital, Mzimba District Hospital does not have an emergency center. So the hospital had to designate space to accommodate any casualties, if any. The hospital therefore prepared a high dependency unit in case of injuries. This included mobilizing resources from different wards such as oxygen cylinders, drugs, and etc. Further, Mzimba District Hospital dispatched 2 ambulances to Chikangawa to join the search team. The ambulance team included anesthetists, clinicians, and nurses. The Director of Health Services for Mberwa District Council led the medical emergency preparatory team. Mzimba North District Health Office also sent 2 extra ambulances from Mzuzu. The Mzimba North DHO is based in Mzuzu, while the Mzimba South DHO is based at the Boma. Among the team dispatched from Mzuzu Central Hospital was a surgeon. Since the place and site where the aircraft may have come down was not ascertained, there was no prior decision of whether to ferry any casualties to Mzimba District Hospital or to Mzuzu Central Hospital. The determining factor was the distance. Response from Layplay. Evidence was received that around 1500 hours, the SPC called the Chief Executive Officer of Layplay to inform him of a possible incident involving the Donia aircraft and also to ask for assistance in the search of the MFT-03. Although the Chief Executive Officer was not on site at the factory, Layplay immediately mobilized his staff, especially those who were working in the forest and were very familiar with the area, to help in the search. Layplay also provided vehicles to the search parties. The team from Layplay worked hand in hand with the MDF and the police and the other parties who were searching. The central point of coordination was the old airstrip at Layplay. Initially, the parties were searching blindly around a 10-kilometer radius of the Airtel Tower at Layplay. This was later expanded to 20 kilometers, but concentrating on the east of the tower, the Kalunguru Charge within Layplay concession area. Layplay manages a plantation that is 20,000 hectares planted area. It has regular patrols and a lot of people work daily on a daily basis around the plantation. The plantation has 4 sections, namely Kalunguru, Chikangawa, Champoyo, and part of Mtungwa. Each section has 7 compartments, and each compartment has a number and an area. At the time MFT-03 went missing, Layplay had just employed about 150 laborers to do weeding in the forest management area. The MDF has a platoon station within the Layplay plantation. The platoon was brought in following cases of thefts of trees and timber as well as encroachment. This was a result of an agreement among the ministries responsible for forestry matters, the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Homeland Security. Let me at this juncture invite Commissioner Alan Chinyola, Senior Counsel, to continue rendering the report.
Thank you. We'll continue now from search leads, evidence of aircraft sightings, and air navigation. The Commission received evidence that there were various search leads that were provided, mostly by members of the public within or in the vicinity of Ripley Plantation. However, most of these were false and led to a waste of a lot of valuable time. There were reports of sightings of a crash or an aircraft at the following: A, around Ripley at 15:37 hours, around Elephant Rock at 16:12 hours, where a certain Mr. Luca Banda called the Rescue Coordination Center to say that there was an aircraft flying very low around the area. C, around Kawandama Hills up to Mzimba, and D, Eswazini. While traveling to Kawandama, a search party saw some smoke downhill. The party walked to the forest, which comprised of blue gum trees that were just about knee to shoulder high. When they reached the spot, they found that it was charcoal burners, Amakala. So the party returned to their vehicles and proceeded towards Kawandama. The party proceeded to a tower which is east of Kawandama Forest Office in order to gain height so that they could see far, but they saw nothing. The men that were manning this tower told the party that they had seen or heard nothing. The party later retained as there was a lot of mist, visibility was poor, and it was also becoming dark. Evidence was received that at the peak of a hill within the Chikangawa forest, there is a watchtower with a resident security guard. When asked, the security guard said that around 11 hours, an aircraft passed his position flying towards east, and it was heading towards Wozi. He said it was producing a sound like a tractor flying near the ground. He said it was foggy at the time and he could not see properly. This was around 17:30 hours. Evidence was also received that someone called the search teams after seeing a light in the bush. Upon reaching the place, these were tractors belonging to Ripley. It was a center where Chikangawa Forest had put up a kind of a camp. The group village headman of the village where this camp is said to have stated that one of the tractor operators, who had since knocked off from duty, had explained that he saw an aircraft passing by and producing sound like a tractor. He said there was thick fog and it was drizzling. Evidence was received by the Commission that as the search party was strategizing to go to Wozi, information came in around 1800 hours with a group that joined the search party that people have seen the aircraft at Chiri. Chiri is on the Mzimba bypass road. The information was that at Chiri, the aircraft had hit a tree. Another piece of information was that the aircraft had hit goalposts of a football ground. The search team rushed there and met the headmaster at Chiri Primary School, who said that an aircraft had indeed passed their school 2 times. It was flying low, a few meters from treetops, and had touched some blue gum trees. The second time it passed the school, it went towards Chikangawa. He also said that time the learners were on break and they were going back in class. He said the learners go back to class at 10:20 a.m. The search parties also received a lot of rumors which turned out to be false. A, one rumor said ndege nauluka akuti yaulukira kupita chauku, pointing towards the residential area of Ripley. B, there's a rumor which said imafuna kugunda masamba blue gum. C, there's a rumor which said aye yatera at a village just behind the Ripley factory. D, some people said no, it had not landed here. It has not crashed here. It has taken the direction of Eswazini. Evidence received from the deputy headmaster of Kasangazi Full Primary School was that he was teaching Standard 6 and it was close to break time at 9:50 hours. He heard the sound of an aircraft. Usually most aircrafts, when they are going to Mzuzu, they pass through this direction. He allowed the learners to go for break a minute early and they were excited. The aircraft was flying very low, lower than the usual altitude. He stated that during that day it was a little bit foggy. He thought that because of the fog, the pilots had decided to fly at a lower altitude. He also stated that there was nothing untoward with the sound. It passed through the school and disappeared towards Elephant Rock. Evidence received from Mr. Conrad Nkosi from Kasangazi was that it was foggy on that day and they could not see far. He heard the sound of an aircraft. In the past, kauniuni or research aircraft had been passing through the area. He then saw the aircraft flying very low. When the aircraft reached near the school, the learners got out of their class to see it. Its tires, that's the landing gear, were out as if it wanted to land. While at the school, it circled at a place in this area and went through a graveyard. It was flying at 10 to 14 meters from the ground. After it circled, it flew at a high speed and it disappeared in the clouds. When he saw the aircraft flying abnormally, he was thinking that it was a Kauniuni aircraft. Later in the night, he received a call from Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Lehman, commanding officer of Moyale Barracks, who asked him about the missing aircraft. On the other side of the Ntungwa Hill is a human settlement. It is on the blind side of the hill where the aircraft was found. Evidence received indicates that some people at the settlement heard a sound on the day, but thought that since the other side of Ntungwa there's a quarry mine, they were blasting rocks using dynamite mabomba, as was usually the case. Others thought that it was within the forest and the poachers were exchanging gunfire with the forest guards. Sometimes that happens. The day being very cold, windy, and foggy, no one thought of investigating further, bearing in mind the possible explanations. The estimated distance between the settlement and the site of the aircraft crash is around 2 kilometers off the M1 road. It was in the evidence of Mr. Manda, a watchman for the telecom networks tower at Pampara Hill, that he was preparing food in the company of Mr. Whiton Losare, a watchman of the forestry department, when he heard a boom sound. He told the commission that his initial reaction was that the generator which was powering the TNM tower had blown off. He stated that he quickly ran out from where he was preparing his food and went to check the generator. He told the commission that he found the generator working and there was no problem. Accordingly, he thought it was some rock blasting at the quarry site in the area, and therefore he went back and continued cooking his food. On his part, Mr. Whiton Lusare, forest watchman, stated that on this day he could not hear much because there was a generator at the TNM tower that was producing a lot of noise. Therefore, he could not hear anything because of the heavy winds and the noise. The commission considered the interim report from BFU, which detailed the actual flight path of the aircraft, and corroborated with the report with some leads and sightings, as well as the evidence received from pilots who have previously flown to Mzuzu. On the flight path depicted in the BFU interim report, Brigadier General Kandula, Deputy Air Force Commander, and also a pilot himself in the Air Force said, and I quote, "Flying to Mzuzu, there is a challenge when it comes to weather. There are two types of flights, what we call instrument flight rules and visual flight rules. When you are flying from Lilongwe to Mzuzu, you start with what you request on the flight, where you want to be on the ground for you to fly. As we are transiting to land to in Mzuzu, you need to be visual. Now, when you depart Lilongwe, sometimes depending on the pilot, you see the way the weather condition is, and you are able to, after you have been flying for some distance with safe flight, you can maintain a low-level flight from Lilongwe to Mzuzu so that you are always level with the clouds, but you fly above the clouds. Now, once you are closer to Mzuzu and you see the weather is not permitting you, you start turning around to look for areas which are open for clouds, so that you have visual contact with the ground, that you can descend visually into landing in Mzuzu. So that explains those chains. This is looking for a place where they can enter and go visual to land," end of quote. Brigadier General Kandula, on the management of the flight to Mzuzu with respect to transition from instrument to visual flying, said, and I quote, First, you have to be out of Lilongwe control zone. Kamuzu International Airport is controlled by radar, and the radar is about 60 miles. After 60 nautical miles, you are outside the radar coverage of Lilongwe. So after you've been released by radar, now it is when you start transiting to visual flying, and it is when you start your descending and you follow visual rules to make it landing in Mzuzu. If it is a clear day, you proceed the same height and descend, and if it is covered, you check areas where it is open, and then you go for those areas. And most of the times in Mzuzu, you hear it's open now, you are able to see the skies. After 2 to 3 minutes, it's covered again. So Mzuzu is unpredictable when it comes to weather, end of quote. On the issue of deviation from the flight plan route, this is the evidence that Captain Henry Ntane from the Zomba Air Base and rated on the Donia 228K stated, and I quote, "It could be a number of things that make it to go off the route. Firstly, it could be when you are encountering bad weather in front of you, such that you see that this is not a safe area. You may request air traffic control to turn left or right of the track. However, if my memory serves me well, that area is one of the areas we call a radar gap. You don't have access to radar services from Lilongwe, which is the only radar service provider unit in Malawi. So, in this particular area, it could be that they encountered the bad weather and they had to divert left of the track, and they could be looking for some place whereby we call it a count procedure, whereby there's a gap somewhere within the clouds where to descend down, and you need to have the visual contact with the ground. This is the procedure that we normally use if we fly from Lilongwe to Mzuzu if you encounter bad weather." End of quote. Suspension of search. Evidence indicates that the Commissioner of Police North, Mr. Richard Luhanga, was the most senior officer at the command center at Reply. It was in the evidence before the commission further that the search and rescue mission was indeed very disjointed on the 10th June 2024 due to A, lack of systematic and strategic approach to the search. Chikangawa Forest has a vast area of 50,000 to 55,000 hectares. B, lack of knowledge on what to do and where to search other than 10 kilometers around the tower at Reply. After a search of a radius of 20 kilometers from the tower was done and there was no sign of MAFT or 3, without any further lead, it became difficult to coordinate the search. C, the fact that most of those involved did not have the proper tools and equipment to continue the search in the night, which was very cold, windy, foggy, and drizzly. D, most of those involved did not have proper attire, bearing in mind that they just rushed and joined the search mission, and in view of the harsh weather conditions, there was very high risk of injury to their bodies or even hypothermia. E, the participation of so many civilians that had joined the search. F, many false leads which led to the search party to waste time chasing after leads. G, the fact that no one had an idea of where to search or where to concentrate their resources. And H, the search operation being done in full view of journalists and members of the public who were relaying information live. At 22 hours, the Commissioner of Police North, after consulting with other stakeholders, decided for a tactical pause in the search. The parties agreed to reconvene at 5 hours the next day. The police and most of the entities that had convened at Reply Command Center dispersed thereafter. However, a team of police detectives was deployed and remained on the ground throughout the night to gather information from the surrounding areas to help the search party when it reconvened. This position was corroborated by the Regional Criminal Investigations Department Officer North, who confirmed that indeed a number of detectives were on the ground to gather intelligence and more credible leads which would be used the following morning. From the evidence received, the MDF did not suspend their search, but simply withdrew from the Reply Command Center and reconvened at their base at Kasitu Camp, where orders from the MDF commander were that they should continue searching throughout the night, which they did. The MDF indicated that the order to suspend the search would not apply to them because they have a different structure and orders can only be received from their superiors in the MDF. communication among and within various organs and agencies. The evidence received indicates that there was heavy traffic of communication from the moment the aircraft had failed to land at Mzuzu at 10:02 hours among various state and non-state entities. Such communication was verbal within, top down, and horizontal between and among organs, among the Office of the President and Cabinet, MDF, Malawi Air Force, Malawi Police Service, Civil Aviation Authority, Airports Developments Limited, and their airports Chileka, Kia, and Mzuzu, Malawi Red Cross, Ministry of Health, and the directors at Mzimba District Hospital and Mzuzu Central Hospital, Malawi Communications Regulatory Authority, TNM PLC, Airtel Malawi PLC, Fire Services, and the Department of Civil Aviation. The evidence reveals that the communication was not coordinated. As such, several people were contacted by multiple persons. Notification of aircraft accident to bereaved families. Madam Mary Chilima gave evidence that normally the late Vice President would keep her updated whenever he traveled. On this day, the late Vice President did inform her that they had departed, but she never received a message that they had landed. She stated that because she was working on an academic paper for her PhD studies, she did not realize that he had not contacted her. She then stated that she started watching the funeral of late Kasambara SC on local television when she noticed that the late Vice President was not present at the funeral. In her mind, she assumed he was already on his way back to Lilongwe, bearing the area arrangement. She told the commission that at 15 hours, Mrs. Grace Valera, wife to Mr. Joshua Valera, came to her house and informed her that the aircraft carrying the late Vice President was missing. At this point, she tried to call the late Vice President's phones, but her calls could not go through. Madam Mary Chilima confirmed that soon after the message of the missing aircraft was given to her by Mrs. Valera, she was told that the Inspector General of Police and the Minister of Health were at the house to see her. This was followed by a few other people who came to the house. It was the testimony of the Inspector General of Police and the Minister of Health that on instructions of His Excellency the President, they visited Madam Chilima to relay the message of the missing aircraft from His Excellency the President. It is in the evidence before the Commission that most of the members of the bereaved families did not receive official notification of the missing of the aircraft. They mostly heard it from social media. They, however, all acknowledged the speech from His Excellency the President to the nation, informing the country about the sad events of that day. Discovery of the aircraft wreckage. At about 5 hours on 11th June 2024, the police, medical personnel, Red Cross, Department of Civil Aviation, Northern Region Water Board, and Raipli met at the command center, which had been set up at Raipli Airfield, to continue the search. The MDF joined later because they had continued the search throughout the previous night, and also because they were following up on some leads they had received. Such leads had taken them to Kasangazi, where they met some teachers and residents. The search team was also joined by several other teams, such as the team from the Malawi University of Science and Technology, MAST, who had brought drones with them. The team from the Rescue and Coordination Center, which including Civil Aviation, ADL, and then the team from Red Cross, who had also brought a drone. Based on the intelligence received during the night, the police officers were divided into 12 groups of 10 officers each, and each group was joined by people from MAST, Ministry of Health, Red Cross, Raipli, and MDF. At around 9 hours, a team from the Air Force, including Colonel Mdoke, arrived from Zomba to join the search. They were briefed as to what had happened the previous night and what was to happen that morning as the search for the missing aircraft continued. At that point, the police had also received some information that the area around Pampara Hill at Ntungwa should also be searched. After the groups were dispatched, a team of police officers, including Commissioner of Police Akis Mwanga, the head of operations at Malawi Police National Headquarters, Deputy Commissioner of Police Mitai, Assistant Commissioner of Police Alex Smenti, the officer in charge, Airport Police, decided to undertake supervision of the search teams. They were joined by Retrieval staff who knew the forest well and settled to commence their supervision at Ntungwa. The team went to Ntungwa Forest Office where they met 4 men whom they asked if they had seen police officers conducting a search there, and the men said they had not. The team also asked the 4 men if they had seen or heard anything unusual the previous day in the morning. The 4 men responded that they had heard noise like a gunshot behind Pampara Hill. The police team then drove behind the Pampara Hill where the men had pointed. Their vehicle broke down. While on that spot, they were rescued by a team of 4 MDF soldiers who were accompanied by 2 sawyers. The MDF team of 4 was led by 2nd Lieutenant Obed Mwenawanda, who was a platoon commander based at Kasitu Camp. With him were Corporal Chadaine Haji Zako, Corporal Makwakwa, and Corporal Dominic Malema. It was the evidence that the sawyers had told the team that they were very familiar with the terrain and landscape of the area. They told them that they had noted some strange development that morning on the terrain or landscape on the top of the hill. From a distance, the search team then saw something which looked like a metal object on the slope of Pampara Hill, away from the Ntungwa settlement. The team wanted to immediately walk across to where the unknown object was, but they were told by the sawyers that they could not use a shortcut as there was a river which they could not cross. Instead, the team was advised to drive back, go up Pampara Hill, up to the telecommunication tower, where they would park their cars and then walk around to search where the object was. The team indeed drove back and then up Pampara Hill and parked their cars by the tower. The team found 2 watchmen at the tower, a Mr. Whiton Lusale and a Mr. Ben Manda. The 2 watchmen testified that they were surprised that the police were asking them about an aircraft when they had not encountered any person around the towers for some days. They testified that no other person had been around the tower other than themselves for over a week. Having found no leads from the watchmen, the team continued down the slope, and when the team was about 200 meters away, they saw a piece of the aircraft. As they approached, they started spotting some of the passengers and crew outside the aircraft wreckage lying lifeless. From this point, the police and MDF officers present at the site began to contact their respective superiors. The police called the Commissioner of Police North and informed him that they had found the aircraft, while the platoon commander called the commanding officer of Moyale Barracks, who in turn called the brigade commander to relay the news that they had found the aircraft. All other search teams and stakeholders were informed by telephone, and they all headed to Pampara Hill. According to the evidence, it was between 10:30 and 11 hours when the aircraft wreckage was found. Colonel Julius Mdoga gave his opinion as to why the aircraft did not catch fire. Although it was difficult to determine this, it was his evidence that this was not the first time that this kind of aircraft, Dornier 228, crashed and did not catch fire. He gave an example about an accident at Mpatsanjoka Aerodrome in Salima, where a similar aircraft crash landed on its belly without catching fire after the landing gear failed to extend. It was explained that perhaps this happened because the aircraft is a high-wing aircraft. He said high-wing aircrafts are those that have wings on top of the fuselage, like the Dornier 228, such that when it crash lands, it is likely the fuselage touches the ground first before the wings where the fuel tanks are located. And in this case, it appeared that after initial contact with a tree, the aircraft hit the ground at very high velocity and it disintegrated on impact. And being a high-wing aircraft, this possibility contributed to its not catching fire. Although at the time of the impact, there was fuel endurance of approximately 3 hours. The commission had evidence that the first persons at the accident were 4 senior officers of the Malawi police, 4 MDF soldiers, 2 sawyers, and 2 other unidentified persons. The commission also had evidence that after the persons had arrived at the accident scene, an order from the commanding officer of the platoon who was on site was issued to the effect that he should immediately cordon off the area. This order was carried out, and when more personnel from both the police and the MDF arrived, the cordon was properly executed. The Commission observed that from midday on 11th of June 2024, both mainstream and social media posted pictures of the accident site and the deceased persons. Both the police and MDF showed the Commission the pictures that they took when they arrived at the accident site. The Commission had the evidence that it was not until Colonel Mdokwe of the Malawi Air Force came to the accident site that there were restrictions on taking of photographs. According to Colonel Mdokwe, he did not prevent the right and properly identified personnel from taking pictures, but he wanted to ensure that only those who had an obligation and mandate to do so were taking pictures. The Commission heard the testimony of several police officers who told the Commission that they took some pictures at the scene of the accident when they arrived, but were abruptly stopped by the military. The police identified Colonel Mdokwe as the officer who stopped them, despite their identifying themselves to the colonel. The Commission had evidence from the police that the police officer who was stopped from taking pictures was in fact the regional police photographer responsible for scenes of crimes. It is in evidence that some persons who were allowed near the accident site attempted to take pictures of the wreckage or dead bodies, but were prevented from doing so by either the MDF or the police. Some persons who had taken pictures on site were forced to delete the pictures they had taken. Further, it was in the evidence that no media practitioner came to the accident scene, as everyone was kept at a distance. Items found at the accident site. It was the testimony of Assistant Superintendent Harembewe of the Regional Police Headquarters, Northern Region, that at the accident site and inside the aircraft, the team found and retrieved the following items. A, 6 assorted smartphones. B, 1 cell phone, blue in color. C, cash amounting to 1,894,000 kwacha. D, cash amounting to 69,500 kwacha. E, 1 hymn book. F, 1 diplomatic passport. G, 2 USB flash disks, silver in color. H, 3 bunches of car keys. I, 1 black jacket. J, 1 diary. K, 1 handbag. And L, 2 pistols. 1 pistol was missing but was later found by MDF. Dr. Squese testified before the Commission that he had collected the sum of 5 million kwacha from Mr. Samson Ngutwa, the clerk to the cabinet, as the amount approved by His Excellency the President as condolence at the funeral of the late Mr. Kasambara, Senior Counsel. Dr. Squese personally informed the Commission that he passed on the sum of money to the late Vice President on departure. This sum of money was not found at the scene of the accident. It was further the testimony of Assistant Superintendent Harembewe that all the items listed above, which he found were handed over to his superiors from Area 30 at the Chikangawa Command Center, and that his bosses took the items with them. Retrieval of bodies. When the medical personnel, members of Red Cross, Civil Aviation Authority, and Fire Department arrived at the crash site, the process of retrieving and identifying the bodies started. The Director General of Mzuzu Central Hospital took charge of this process. Bodies were identified and taken to a place away from the wreckage. It was then discovered that there were other bodies missing and could be trapped in the aircraft. The Mzuzu Airport Fire Services Department then used its equipment to cut the aircraft in order to extract the bodies that were trapped inside and under the aircraft wreckage. After all the bodies were identified, placed on stretchers covered with blankets, they were taken to the ambulances that were waiting at the top of Pampara Hill near the towers. Evidence from medical personnel and others on site indicates that on the day that the aircraft wreckage was discovered, there was no proper path from the tower to the accident site. The actual spot where the aircraft had lodged was on a smaller hill, which was itself very steep with substantial growth of shrubs at the time of the accident. The tower where the ambulances had parked was on another higher hill with very steep terrain as well. In the harsh weather of the day, it took over 2 hours to carry the bodies uphill. The bodies were all then taken to the command center at the Raipla airfield. Upon arrival at Raipla airfield, the bodies were taken into a tent where they were placed in body bags, which were supplied by Mzimba District Hospital. Repatriation of the bodies to Lilongwe. The commanding officer of Moyale Barracks was informed that the bodies were going to be airlifted from Zuzu Airport to Lilongwe Air Base. So he sent orders to have Mzuzu Airport cordoned off. As this was about to be done, he got further information that the bodies would be airlifted from Raipla Airfield to Lilongwe Air Base by 2 Zambian Air Force helicopters. He then ordered that the Raipla Airfield be cordoned off in order to control the crowd that had gathered there. At exactly 16:25 hours, the bodies were airlifted from Raipla Airfield to Kamuzu International Airport and not to Lilongwe Air Base as originally planned, because Lilongwe Air Base has no landing lights. The two Zambian helicopters stopped over at Kasungu Airport to refuel because they had offloaded some fuel on their way to Chikangawa in order to accommodate the weight of the bodies. Thereafter, they proceeded to land at Kamuzu International Airport. Arrival in Lilongwe. At 1600 hours, the helicopters carrying the remains of the deceased passengers and crew arrived at Kamuzu International Airport. His Excellency the President received the remains in the company of cabinet ministers, the SPC, senior government officials, the MDF command and other military officers, the Inspector General and other police officers, members of the diplomatic corps, leaders of several political parties, the clergy, members of the bereaved families, amongst others. After that, the late Vice President body was taken to mortuary at Goodwill Funeral Services in Area 4, and the rest of the bodies were taken to Sunset Funeral Services at Kanengo. The body of the late Vice President arrived at Goodwill Funeral Services and was received by the MDF, who began to stand sentry until the burial. I'll now hand over to Commissioner Professor Nyango Mkandawili to continue.
The next part of the presentation deals with the autopsies, and we'll start off with the section on procurement of the autopsy services. It is in evidence of family member Dr. Ben Chilima that on 11th June 2024, the Chilima family privately had started making arrangements for an autopsy to determine the cause of death of the late Vice President. The family initially contacted pathologist Dr. Tamiwe Tomoka and then Dr. Steve Kamiza. It is in evidence that Dr. Tomoka told the Commission that around 19 hours on 11th June 2024, she was contacted sequentially by Mr. Kwesi Msusa and a family member, Mr. Sazuze, both requesting a post-mortem on the body of the late Vice President. She advised them that ideally, looking at the profile of the deceased, the state should ordinarily be the one requesting the autopsy. Dr. Tomoka also told the Commission that soon after this communication, the Secretary for Health, Dr. Samson Mdolo, also contacted her requesting post-mortem services. She responded that as there were many bodies, and considering the sensitivity of the case, she would need support from another senior pathologist in the name of Dr. Steve Kamiza. She further recommended that all bodies undergo autopsies so as to assess the possible cause of death in relation to patterns of injury sustained in all of the victims. In his evidence, Dr. Samson Mdolo confirmed that he was aware that the family of the late Vice President was requesting an autopsy. Accordingly, he recommended that all family members should have the right to choose a pathologist of their choice rather than have government impose a pathologist to avoid conflicts in future. Government would, however, facilitate and pay for the autopsy services so rendered. Dr. Tomoka further told the Commission that Dr. Kamiza would only be able to join her the following day, and the postmortems were scheduled for 13th June 2024 in order to allow Dr. Kamiza to travel to Lilongwe on the 12th of June. Dr. Kamiza confirmed in his testimony that he was contacted on the evening of 11th of June 2024 by a family member of the deceased and also by officials from the Office of the President and Cabinet, who arranged for his travel from Blanda to Lilongwe on 12th June 2024. As stated, the autopsies were conducted by the two specialist pathologists, Associate Professor Dr. Steve Kamiza from Kamuzu University of Health Sciences and Dr. Tamiwe Tomoka, who is the lead pathologist and heads the Malawi Cancer Program at the University of North Carolina, Lilongwe campus. The family of Madam Patricia Shaniu Zimbiri requested that a third pathologist, Dr. Charles Zamalala, who is a lecturer in pathology at the Kamuzu University of Health Sciences, be in attendance during her autopsy. Dr. Zamalala duly attended the procedure in observer capacity, but did not submit any report. He was also asked several times to come and give evidence, but gave several excuses and was not able to attend to the commission. We now deal with the site of the autopsies. It was in evidence that all autopsies were conducted on the 13th of June 2024, 3 days after the accident. This meant that the bodies had been in ambient environment for about 33 hours, from approximately 10 hours on 10th of June 2024, when we think the plane crashed, to 19 hours on 11th June 2024, when the bodies were delivered at the respective mortuaries and put in a controlled environment. The 7 bodies were examined at Sunset Funeral Services mortuary in Kanengo, and 1 body was examined at Goodwill Funeral Services mortuary at Area 4. Autopsies for the 7 bodies were conducted between 07 hours and 10:30 hours at Sunset Funeral, while the autopsy of the body of the late Vice President was conducted at 12:51 hours at Goodwill Funeral Services. It is in evidence that an autopsy was not conducted on the body of Mr. Abdul Lapkin, following the request of the family to be buried as soon as possible, as demanded by the Islamic faith. The body of Mr. Abdul Lapkin was therefore released on the morning of 12th of June 2024 and was buried on the same day at his home village in Mangochi. Autopsy methodology, environment, and findings. It is in the evidence of Dr. Kamiza that ideally he should have visited the crash site after the accident, as soon after the crash as possible, to appreciate firsthand the accident circumstances. Without visiting the site, he relied on verbal information from interviews with the police, military officers, and medical personnel who were first on the scene, as well as some limited photographic evidence taken by the police and military officers. He stated that the photographs that were taken were not enough and not professionally taken for pathology assessment. Further, most of them were taken after the crashed aircraft and site had been tampered with in the process of removing the bodies that had been ejected from the aircraft and those that had been trapped and had to be extracted from the aircraft. However, he did indicate that they did their best with the available photographs. Deputy Commissioner of Police Mitai testified that as police, they initially took a few photographs, but they were eventually stopped by Colonel Julius Mdokwe of the Air Force for security reasons. In his testimony, Fire Officer Tobe Kunga of Mzuzu Airport also testified that they were only allowed to take pictures by the Air Force cutting the aircraft to extract trapped victims, and therefore did not record the untouched accident site. Similarly, Senior Medical Officer from Zuzu Central Hospital, who was on the medical team first to arrive at the scene, testified that they were prevented from taking pictures for forensic purposes. In the evidence of Dr. Tomoka, she testified that it was difficult to get interviews from the military and police who were first responders at the site due to the tight timelines and the highly charged environment and the pressure to conduct the autopsies quickly. She told the commission that they did as much as they could in the environment they worked in. It is in evidence that Dr. Kamiza told the Commission that the aim of the following of the autopsies was: A, to catalogue in detail all injuries in order to determine injury patterns and possible correlation of these to the mechanism of injury. B, to determine the manner of death, whether accidental, natural, or due to homicide. C, to determine the cause of death. And D, to reconstruct the possible sequence of events at the accident site. It was evidence of Dr. Kamiza that the autopsies started at Sunset Funeral Mortuary in the morning of 13th June 2024, where the cause of death was obvious from exterior factors and the body cavities. Where the cause of death was obvious from exterior factors and the body cavities were closed, an internal examination was not done. All autopsies had either family or official persons present to identify and observe the process. This is recorded and reflected on the autopsy reports from the pathologist. However, Dr. Kamiza reported lack of coordination amongst the various stakeholders, including the OPC, police, MDF, and the private mortuaries, as a result of poor communication relating to when and who would do the autopsies. Of concern, he noted the following: A, the bodies at Sunshine Mortuary had all been interfered with by morticians who had already cleaned, packed, and sutured some wounds and injuries. It was not clear who had given permission to the morticians to start handling the bodies. Some morticians took pictures of the bodies before working on them. The ethics of morticians taking pictures of bodies and where such pictures potentially ended up is an area of concern. Police forensic photographic evidence was done prior to the arrival of the pathologist, but some after the morticians had already interfered with the bodies. C, the MDF insisted on having bodies of MDF officers autopsied first and insisted on a fast process so that MDF can arrange funerals for their officers. The next section, pathologist findings and the cause of death. In terms of the pathologist findings, Dr. Kamiza gave evidence that for all the deceased, the manner of death was an aircraft accident. The cause of instant death was high-velocity injuries to the head, leading to fracture disintegration of the skull with complete spillage of brain tissue in 7 cases, and a high-velocity blunt force impact to the chest wall, leading to multiple thoracic cage fractures, complete severance of the aorta, ruptured heart, causing massive intrathoracic hemorrhage and circulatory collapse in 1 patient. All victims also had severe multiple injuries in the face, chest, and limbs, indicating high-velocity impact against solid structures in front of them, likely the back of seats that they were facing. All injuries were non-survivable. Both Dr. Kamiza and Dr. Tomoka testified that there was no possibility, no evidence of homicide or injury from wild animals before or after the accident as the cause of or contribution to the death. Dr. Kamiza further explained to the Commission that the condition of one body with evidence of cadaveric spasm of one hand tightly grasping a personal object as evidence of an instant, violent, and emotional death that was being anticipated as the plane crashed. In his reconstruction of the possible sequence of events, Dr. Kamiza suggested that the aircraft hit the ground with the nose at high velocity and breaking up instantly at the point of impact, evidenced by the large crater that was created and the aircraft debris being seen from the point of impact all the way to about 30 meters to where the aircraft rested. Jet A1 fuel and soil and dust was found in the cabin and deep in open wounds on the bodies where they were ejected from the aircraft or trapped in the aircraft. This is consistent with instant breaking up of the aircraft on impact and the fatal wounds being sustained instantly on impact. He stated that some bodies were ejected out as the aircraft was rolling after the initial fatal impact, resulting in torn garments and clothing. It was in his testimony that death had already occasioned at the point of ejection, evidenced by lack of blood at the site where the bodies were found. It was evidence of both pathologists that it was not possible to exclude medical impairment due to conditions such as stroke or heart attack in the pilots, because tissues of the heart and brain were not sampled due to the severe injuries from the impact. However, it was noted that it would be very unlikely that both pilots would suffer these medical conditions simultaneously or concurrently. They further submitted that they did not have access to normal medical records to confirm pre-existing medical conditions that could potentially lead to an in-flight impairment. Both pathologists told the Commission that specimens for toxicological assessment were not done because the bodies had no blood or urine to sample at the time of the autopsy. Tissues from the eye, which is known as vitreous fluid, in one crew member was obtained and preserved and can potentially be used for toxicological assessment. The specimen has been preserved at Kamuzu Central Hospital Laboratory. Dr. Kamiza confirmed that tissue was kept only from one crew member, despite his listing on the injuries on the other pilot stated that he had lost only one eye, and potentially vitreous fluid from that eye could have also been taken from the crew. He gave the opinion that probably both eyes were lost, and he recorded the injury wrongly. Dr. Kamiza told the Commission that although he could not rule out intoxication by way of toxicological investigations, he did not feel the crew would be intoxicated as they were military officers and they were flying the Vice President, so he would not expect them to be so. And this possibility was pushed aside. Nonetheless, he instructed the mortician to keep the sample in case further investigations may be needed. At the time of autopsy, there was minimal communication with civil aviation authorities on specific tissues that would be required for analysis. Dr. Tomoka told the Commission that the sample preserved, if sent to a laboratory in South Africa, the results could be back in 3 to 4 weeks. In view of the time lag between the accident and the time of sample collection, the results so obtained for any toxicological assessment are likely to be adversely affected. Survivability. In light of the manner and extent of injuries described under Section 2.3.1.5, death occurred instantly upon impact. By the time some passengers and crew were thrown out of the aircraft, death had already occurred. The accident was not survivable. Submission of autopsy reports. The pathologists submitted the autopsy reports to the relevant authorities for onward transmission to relevant families. Dr. Kamiza told the Commission that the late Vice President's report went to the Chilima family. Dr. Mdolo told the Commission that the report of Madam Patricia Shanil Zimbiri was passed on to her family on request. The reports for crew members of MTF were sent to the MTF commander, and for the police, the reports were sent to the Inspector General of Police. Copies of all autopsy reports were further sent to OPC through the Secretary of Health, as the OPC was officially responsible for requesting for the conduct of these autopsies on the rest of the bodies. Family involvement in autopsy process and proceedings in the mortuary. The experiences of how families assessed their participation in the autopsies and proceedings in the mortuary varied. Dr. Kamiza gave evidence that due to the severe nature of injuries, he recommended against viewing of the bodies. He also told the Commission that the autopsies were done in an open space where all the bodies were in full view of everybody who entered the room, such that a relative going into the area would be exposed to all the other bodies, which would be very traumatizing. For this reason, relatives were not allowed to view the bodies during the autopsy process. That notwithstanding, Dr. Kamiza observed that the autopsy area did not provide enough privacy and was overcrowded with police and MDF officers, all taking pictures as well as performing investigations and other activities on their officers, like dressing them up in military clothes after the autopsies, ready for burial. The space was not ideal for autopsies, but the pathologists had to do with what they had. Nearly all the bodies were grossly disfigured, and they were placed in body bags before being laid in the coffins, and a recommendation was made to each family not to view the bodies for fear of deep psychological trauma resulting from viewing of such bodies. For family members who testified, the following were their experiences. A. The Zimbiri family. Ms. Lucy Dixon Ini Zimbiri, daughter of Madam Patricia Chanel Zimbiri, testified as a member of the family online. She was grateful for the support of the Zimbiri. She was grateful for the support to the Zimbiri and Muluzi families that they received. She wondered if this was because of the privileged position that they have as a family. She is aware that many other families have not received the autopsy reports. As regards the autopsy process, she told the Commission that their appointed pathologist, Dr. Charles Zamalala, did not have an input in the autopsy report, and he just observed. Dr. Kamiza confirmed that Dr. Zamalala only observed the process. Mrs. Dixon also wondered why any samples were not taken from the body of her mother, as this may have helped in diagnosis of the cause of death, and not just assume that trauma was the cause of death. B. Chilima family. On the 12th of June 2024, the SPC visited the Chilima family, who had felt the government was slow in making burial plans. The family privately had already started making plans for an autopsy and the purchase of a casket. The SPC informed the family what plans government had put in place for the deceased, and these included: A. All the deceased would undergo government-sponsored autopsies by privately identified pathologists. B. The last vice president would be honored with a state funeral, while considering the wishes of the family. C. The last vice president would be laid to rest after all other deceased in order to give him a befitting ceremony as a late vice president. On 13th June 2024, around 12:51 hours, an autopsy was conducted on the body of the late Vice President, Dr. Ben Chilima, in relation to the late Vice President, represented the family at the autopsy and gave evidence as follows. A. The family was happy with the team of Drs. Kamiza and Tomoka as pathologists, as they were the ones they had contacted privately. B. At the mortuary, there was good police security, and all police and civilians were identified by IDs. C. The pathologists did a thorough job and allowed the family members to ask questions for clarification. They asked specifically for verification that there were no malicious injuries, such as gunshot injuries, and the pathologists took family members for a visual inspection of the body, where indeed there was no evidence of gunshot injuries. D. The family noted that indeed the nature of injuries sustained were not survivable, and that death was probably instantaneous. E. The family were shared the autopsy report and were satisfied with it. The former second lady also gave evidence in relation to the autopsy process. She is aware that this took place and has seen the autopsy report. She particularly wanted to know if any toxicological tests were done on the crew and what the results are. C. The family of Lapken family. Mrs. Sarah Lapken, spouse to Abdul Lapken, whose body was taken for burial on 12th June without undergoing an autopsy, was emotionally distraught. D. The rest of the families. Due to the fact that the requests for autopsies came from the OPC, the pathologist submitted the autopsy reports to the requesting party, in this case the OPC. For this reason, most of the families were not aware that the autopsy reports in which they had an interest could be sourced on request from the employers of their deceased relatives. Thank you. I hand over to Bishop Nkosi.
Osaiwala kupanga subscribe ku channel ya